Hi, my name's Garrett Gunderson, and I'm a bit obsessive when it comes to saving on tax. I want to make sure that I know every legal and ethical way that people can navigate the tax code so they can keep a lot more of what they make and stop tipping the government. Now, the reality is 93% or more of small business owners overpay on taxes. Saving on tax is one of the easiest ways to recapture lost cash flow. I mean, you could try to double your rate of return in the stock market. You could try to, take more risk and wait longer for investments or scrimp or sacrifice. But the reality is, if you can just keep more of what you make without having to cut back, it's a lot better way to get wealthy. And you know what? We have this thing called the accredited network, which is filled with CPAs and tax attorneys that obsess about this even more than I do. So we've got this amazing team approach so small business owners can find all the different ways to recover cash, whether it's going back and amending returns, or whether it's creating better tax strategy, or choosing the right type of corporation, or figuring out how to navigate all these changes that come up, either because in 2020 we had 3 IRS notices, or in 2017 there was a major overhaul of the tax system with Trump's tax plan. And what we found is that people save nearly $13,000 per year right to the bottom line, and that's something that doesn't just happen once. It happens year in and year out because someone spent 20 to 60 minutes of their time talking to the right people. So what I want to share with you here are some tax horror stories from small business owners. I hate horror films, but I think I hate horror stories of hearing about people that are tipping the government or they get really in a tough spot because they don't understand tax. Let's begin with Jill, who owns a small business with her husband and says, when we first got into business, we were too naive to know about paying taxes on the revenue, and our accountant gave us no advanced warning about our tax burden. When tax time came around, we were told we owed $50,000 that we did not have in the bank. Prior to this, we have always received tax refunds. It was a whole new world to us, and we had to go on an IRS payment plan. Pamela says, the worst tax horror story is from my first successful year in business. I had a bad accountant who gave me a surprise tax bill of $125,000 right at tax time. Ouch. And that accountant probably said, hey, congratulations, you had a great year. Small business owner Paul W. says, my worst tax story is what I'm going through now. A company approached me about setting up a Section 125 cafeteria plan. Now I'm in the middle of an audit, and they say this tax savings plan I set up is not set up properly. Laura says, my biggest tax challenge I'm facing is that my tax advisor did not take state taxes out for me for the past 2 years. I started receiving collection notices from the IRS, and now I'm paying triple state taxes this year, plus penalties. It's been a nightmare, needless to say. I've fired my tax advisor. Jessie, who owns and manages a small farm with her husband, says, our tax horror story came as a result of trying to save money doing our own tax planning when starting out our new business. We thought we weren't big enough yet for professional tax help, so we kept saying, oh, we'll hire a tax team when we're more successful. So here's what happened. In 2 years, we went from food stamps to paying off all our consumer debt and building up a nice savings account due to the success of our new farm business. And then boom, we got hit with a huge tax bill that wiped out our last 2 years of savings. We never really paid tax before, so this was a huge shock. We learned that good tax planning, even before you become successful, is money well spent. Ronnie says this year is gearing up to be a tax horror story. Last year I sold my business, I took the money, moved across the country, and bought a big house. I plan to take at least a year off to figure out what I want to do next. Now I find out I have a huge tax bill as a result of the sale of my business last year, but I don't have enough money to pay for it, and no incoming cash flow. Darren says, my biggest tax horror story came the year after I left a bad business partnership. I was busy working on a new business, and then I got hit with an $8,000 tax bill from my old partnership that I haven't made any estimated tax payments on, and I didn't have the cash to pay it. Bill says the tax horror story is not my own, but from my boss. My boss's father died a few years ago and left him and his brother a multi-million-dollar company. But after they took over the company, my boss and his brother found out they each had around $2 million in back taxes that they owed and no funds to pay it. Allison says, my worst tax story is when 2 of my business partners failed to file the LLC tax returns for 2 consecutive years. I ended up paying for their fair share of taxes for 3 years worth of business income, and I won't get any of that back unless I go after them in a lengthy court battle. Let me tell you one of my tax horror stories. Okay, so I had 2 business partners that died in 2006, and we had 42 employees, and I'm just trying to keep everything together. And so we have the CFO, and we're putting money in to pay for all the self-employment taxes that we're responsible for. And guess what? He just spent that money rather than give it to the IRS. So I'm on the phone with someone that's telling me about a horrible situation that they're having, and I see the IRS is trying to call. And I say, hey, can I just have a second? I click over, and the IRS is telling me that I owe All this money for self-employment tax that I had actually put money aside, but that got embezzled and not paid because I was so busy just trying to keep everything together after the death of my partners. Jenny says, my husband and I started a brand new business that we're just getting profitable, but we were still set up as an LLC and not an S-Corp. Our tax bill came to $18,000, which we couldn't fork out because we had barely been making enough to make payroll and get supplies for jobs. The next year, we got a new accountant and filed as an S-Corporation, and our tax bill was $7,000. But after 4 years, we're still struggling to make payments on the $15,000 of back taxes. It feels like a hole we can't dig out of. John, a small business owner from New Jersey, says, we're looking at a $25,000 to $30,000 tax bill for 2019. We didn't make any estimated payments during 2019. We thought we'd just pay it all when we filed in 2020 and pay whatever penalties and interest was due. But due to the COVID thing, we now have no cash to pay last year's taxes, and that's pretty scary. David, an entrepreneur from New York, says, in 2012, my brother gave me a tip to invest in a company that sounded awesome, but ended up being a Bernie Madoff type Ponzi scheme. The guy running the scheme is now in federal prison. My horror story is not only did I lose my $25,000 investment, I lost several months of my life during the trial where I had to testify against him, plus I got hit with a tax fraud investigation and countless fees from state and federal authorities. Jay, a freelance employee, says, 1 year I made an extra $80,000 with a side hustle. Nice. The horror story came the next April when I had to write a check to the IRS for $22,000 instead of getting my normal refund. Gerald, the small business owner, says, my tax horror story is a 4-year tax audit that's still going on and accruing interest on the unpaid tax every day, all because I didn't have my tax team working for me and try to do the taxes myself. Stephen, who owns an e-commerce site, says, 1 year I got a surprise $20,000 tax bill. I wasn't anticipating it. It was 100% due to poor communication on the part of my CPA during the year. Karen, who runs a local floral business with her partner, says, my biggest tax horror story was having a surprise $37,000 tax bill when we didn't have the money to pay it. After that, we intentionally overpaid estimated taxes to avoid having that happen again. But now we hate giving the IRS an interest-free loan every single year. Alan, a small business owner, says, I didn't pay any estimated taxes my first year in business and then had to pay $14,000 next year plus penalties and interest. Lance, who runs a small business with his wife, said, our worst horror story was having to pay $20,000 plus in taxes on tax day. George, who runs a handyman business, says, back when I was first getting my business started, we finished a huge job in December and submitted for payment thinking that the check would come back mid-January. We were surprised when we got the check before Christmas. I stupidly put it in the bank immediately, so instantly became income for that year. When tax time came around 4 months later, we owed over $30,000 and had to borrow money to pay the IRS. If I had deposited the check 2 weeks later, we could have had deferred it and to at least $15,000 of tax the next year. Dawn, the wife of a self-employed handyman, says, our worst tax story is that my hubby is self-employed and his bookkeeping is so bad that he hasn't paid taxes for the last 3 years. The accountant now has the info and we're bracing ourselves for a huge tax bill plus penalties. My hubby still doesn't think it's a big deal and would prefer to keep his head buried in the sand. Summer, who manages her husband's law firm, says, it's been years, but I still remember it well. Thinking we owed a minimal amount of tax only to find out we owed $40,000 on tax day. Caroline, a dentist in Austin, Texas, says, my worst tax horror story was having to tell my husband that I owed $27,000 in back taxes from 13 years ago, right when we were attempting to buy our dream home, and informing him that we were going to lose the house and the $2,000 in earnest money, along with the appraised and inspection cost. A true test of his love for me. Eric, a business owner from California, says, my biggest tax horror story was when I got audited and they went back 7 years because I didn't have receipts for that period. So they disallowed any and all business deductions I had taken and hit me with a $500,000 tax bill. Finally, Sherry, who owns a profitable online business, says, my worst tax horror story was getting hammered with a $70,000 tax bill last year just for being successful.